Champion Chris Benoit found dead in his Atlanta home.
Paramedics found Argentino bruised and gasping for air.
Owen Hart has tragically died from that accident here tonight.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the 50 most controversial moments in professional wrestling history as we approach the final stretch with the top 10 most controversial moments in professional wrestling history, in my opinion. Number 10, Katie Vick. Now, obviously, it's not as if we weren't really expecting this or you weren't really expecting this to be on this list. And you're probably asking yourself, wow, this is relatively high considering that it was a kayfabe angle. Which, yeah, one may say that. But it's by far the most controversial of all the kayfabe angles we've ever seen in professional wrestling because of the true extent as to how far they went with the degeneracy in itself. So to give a bit of a backstory, we had this, well, first, actually, now that I think about it, let's go back a little bit further. Not too much further back, but about a month prior to all this. The World Heavyweight Championship, which was essentially the WCW World Heavyweight Championship, was reinstated underneath WWE. It previously was around in its original incarnation, obviously in WCW as the Big Gold Belt for Ric Flair. And it made an appearance for the first time during the Invasion angle when obviously Booker T was the WCW World Champion. And they used it for a while as a part of the Undisputed Championship as far as having two belts, because two World Championships, right? Well, it was gone for a little bit, probably like a good 6 months or so. They, I think, made the Undisputed Championship as a whole title after Triple H won it from Jericho after WrestleMania X8. And they awarded it to Triple H not too long after SummerSlam, like a week later. It was like not too long before Unforgiven. And Triple H ended up defending the belt against Rob Van Dam. He never won the belt in the tournament. Eric Bischoff just gave it to him, which I always thought was completely abhorrent and just blatant ridiculous, but it's Triple H and it's 2002, right? What can you do about it? He was promised the whole... You guys know also that with Triple H, apparently, which I'm pretty sure some of you might know, but the whole Reign of Terror, it was all because he was promised this run from Vince McMahon after he put over Hulk Hogan back at Backlash that year for the... because, you know, Triple H only had the World Championship. He only had it for a month. He only had a month reign. Then he ended up dropping the belt to Hogan at Backlash when, you know, Hogan had the huge explosion and reaction at WrestleMania X8 that year, and then he had that long standing ovation on Raw the following night. Vince thought he can milk a little bit more out of Hulkamania, and that's why he decided to take the belt off of Triple H. But with that, he promised Triple H a hefty title reign, which became the Reign of Terror. Nevertheless, though, after the match with Rob Van Dam at Unforgiven, he entered into a feud with Kane over the World Heavyweight Championship. This all started off also because Kane, he won the Intercontinental Championship from Chris Jericho on an episode of Raw, and then he ended up defending his tag team championships because he was a double champion at the time, right? Him and Hurricane. He ended up defending the tag team championship belts in a Fatal 4-Way TLC match on one of the... Actually, that was the first ever Raw Roulette from Las Vegas in 2002. Kane ended up winning the match by himself after Evolution, or I guess it would have just been Rick and Triple H at the time. They ended up taking Hurricane out backstage, right? Kane won the match by himself. Excellent match. Highly recommend watching it. And Triple H came on the Titantron to ruin Kane's celebration by essentially telling him that he knows his secret, right? The secret ended up being Katie Vick, where the whole story, or the retelling of it goes, Kane took a girl from a party, which is completely contradictory if you think of Kane's upbringing, obviously, because from what I understand, Kane was in a mental asylum. His practically his whole entire adult childhood, because Undertaker planned the murder of his parents at the funeral home, and he lit the whole building on fire, and he blamed it on Kane, and then Kane was taken to a mental asylum. That was the whole story that I remember about Kane and his background. But apparently there was a bit of a nun cannon happening, and Kane ended up taking a bit of a detour, and he got a girl intoxicated, drugged up or whatever, and then he took a girl home who was drugged up and intoxicated or whatever, and he ended up getting into a car accident which killed her. And his first thought was not to call the police or the ambulance or anything like that, but to essentially perform necrophilia. I'll let you look that up whenever you get the opportunity. But Triple H thought it was smart, and WWE thought it was smart to take a necrophilia angle, which I'll just tell you, I'm fucking sugarcoating here, you don't have to look it up. He has sex with a dead body. They decided to take that one step further and have Triple H put on a Kane mask, go to a real funeral parlor where apparently and allegedly there was an actual funeral going on next door, and Triple H decided to have sex with a mannequin doll. And they simulated necrophilia on live television. Oh bro, it gets even better though, right? Because while they're actually doing the whole necrophilia angle, Triple H, he Jesus Christ, he's fucking the doll, and one of the things that he said was, "I screwed your brains out," and he like lifts up his hands, and he has like this meat or gelatin like substance in his hands. It is the wildest fucking angle I think I've ever seen that didn't involve actual physical trauma. This was wild. This was crazy. Nobody wanted to no one wanted to be a part of this shit. Apparently, I remember The Rock saying this was one of the most disgusting things he's ever seen the WWE do. And rightfully so. Now, you can chalk it up to the fact that, hey, they were trying new things. They were trying to be different. They were somewhat desperate at the time because Rock and Austin at this point in time were both gone. And it was very concerning as to when they will return, with The Rock obviously doing movies and Austin obviously being preoccupied with his demons. There was no obvious timetable as to when or if they were ever going to return. So I understand what they were trying to do. I get the process of trying to do new things, but they maybe went a tad bit too far. And mind you, look, I'm one of those people, I don't give a shit. In the end of the day, actually, they could do the Katie Vick angle right now, and I really wouldn't give a fuck. But speaking as far as the general consensus of the population, yeah. And to make matters much worse, I kind of have that Booker T effect where like you do something really, really controversial and it doesn't even pay off, because Kane ended up losing the match anyways at No Mercy. Like he still ended up, I mean, maybe he had a lot better showing than Booker T, because Booker took a pedigree and then sat there like a little bitch for like 30 seconds before getting pinned off of one fucking pedigree, versus Kane, they had to use a sledgehammer. But still though, nevertheless, he ended up beating Kane in a story that does more damage to Kane, whether or not he wins or loses, but he actually lost, which adds more credibility. That's why they called it the Reign of Terror. You came in Triple H's path, holy shit, you were absolutely fucking screwed. I mean, think about it with Kane and Rob Van Dam, for an example, being the... Actually, before I even go, can I say this for a second? I should have made the Reign of Terror its own fucking arc as far as one of the choices. Think about this. RVD 2002 was his last title shot, right? Didn't get another title shot again until like 2006. Kane, that was his last title shot. He didn't get another title run until like 2010? Booker T. That was his last title shot in 2002. What, at the Elimination Chamber? Or in 2003 also, excuse me? He didn't get another shot for like 3 more years in 2006 also. Shawn Michaels never got a title shot ever again, or a title run ever again. Jericho, he didn't get another title run again until like, what, 2008? Yeah. You came into the path of Triple H in 2002. Your title prospects and your entire character run were relegated to the mid-card for years and years to come. But Katie Vick probably did the most damage out of anything in regards to the Reign of Terror. Again, Kane did again another title run again for like damn near a decade. All right, let's get on to the next choice, the next section. Number 9, mass transit. So we're going to read this article and we'll take you from here so you can have better context, and then I'll apply my narrative or my opinion to it when it's all said and done. But was almost taken away by a horrific accident, depending on who you listen to, nearly cost the life of then 17-year-old wrestling fan Eric Koulas, aka Mass Transit. 25 years ago, which obviously this was written in 2021. Now this is more like nearly 29 years ago, almost 30 years ago, but we'll just read it within the context that it was provided in. 25 years ago, right on the cusp of the company getting nationwide pay-per-view, the, and I quote, mass transit incident came very close to putting a kibosh on the whole promotion. As ECW was gearing up for a show in Revere, Massachusetts, Axel Rotten was booked to team with Devon Dudley against the Gangstas, New Jack and Mustafa. When Rotten was unable to make the show, Koulas, who was also booked on the show, or booked on the card to face a few dwarves, had convinced Paul Heyman to let him fill in for Rotten. He had claimed that he was 21 years old and he was under the tutelage of esteemed trainer Walter Killer Kowalski, who also trained Chyna and Triple H. If even one of those things were true, perhaps disaster could have been averted. Known for being one of the craziest hardcore wrestlers alive, New Jack was asked by Koulas to help get him color during the match. Not wanting to mind hurting someone, New Jack was happy to oblige. Only the Gangsta inadvertently cut too deep and severed a few arteries. As Koulas lay in the ring with blood pouring out of his head, New Jack asked if he was okay, as he and Mustafa kept wailing away on the kid with all sorts of hardcore weapons. Finally, his father came out and screamed to the ring bell and that he was only 17. New Jack, never one to shy away from heat, used the incident to cut a promo. And I quote from New Jack, "I don't care if the motherfucker dies, he's white. I don't like white people. I don't like people from Boston. I'm the wrong nigga to fuck with." Koulas was carted off on a stretcher and received 50 stitches. In an RF shoot interview years later, New Jack stated that he told the kid it was a bad idea, and up until even his final tweet expressed little if any remorse for what happened. The match and the event were captured on a fan recording of the show and used in an eventual lawsuit. As Koulas was carted off, Tommy Dreamer stayed with the kid, who was flipping the bird to the crowd still trying to be a heel. News of the incident spread quickly. ECW, namely Paul Heyman and New Jack, were taken to trial for assault. More importantly, the wrestling fans was that on Christmas Eve 1986, the first ever pay-per-view was pulled from the schedule by the cable companies. In the courtroom, truth about the incident had come out that Koulas had falsified his documentation about his age and training. Once that was revealed, New Jack was acquitted of all charges, and after some begging and pleading with the pay-per-view providers, Barely Legal 1987 was put back on the schedule. It all seems open and shut. A kid lies about his age and, more importantly, his level of training to get put into a wrestling show. When things got too real, everyone pulled back the violence and Koulas got the help that he needed. A wrestling company was sued for their supposed negligence. It wasn't the first time and hopefully was the last. And then obviously they start to go more deep into, I'm reading an entire article about New Jack's life. I had to take that little portion out. But, they start getting into the whole stuff with Vic Grimes and XPW, which I'm pretty sure you guys are somewhat aware of, with New Jack nearly killing someone by throwing him off a scaffold because I think they owed him money or something like that. New Jack is an absolute fucking psychopath. But, yeah, New Jack ended up nearly killing a 17-year-old kid. So can I give my thoughts and opinions on this? Now, I'm not here to stick up for New Jack, and I know people are going to be like, you're being contrarian for the sake of being contrarian. No, I'm not being contrarian for the sake of being contrarian, because I'm not going to sit here and say that the kid deserved to die or anything like that. That's fucking stupid. What I am going to suggest, though, is a little bit of a different interpretation as far as this is concerned, right? Because you hear New Jack's comments and you may think to yourself, he's callous, he's cold-hearted, he's evil, and all those things are absolutely true. Make no mistake about it. But to keep it in context, this is what I think happened. I think the kid, Eric, I think after lying about his age, New Jack knew he had no clue about any of this. No one had any clue about this. Now, him gigging Eric was actually probably an accident. He probably did not know that he severed the kid's arteries, right, when he cut his head open, right? The thing is, though, kayfabe is still a thing in 1996. And New Jack gimmick, along with the gangsters in general, were that they did not fuck with white people like that. That was their whole gimmick, right? In their mind, they're thinking to themselves, Eric is actually 23. Eric is no different than the rest of the hooligans here. Yeah, he's bleeding. Yeah, all this other stuff. I'll go backstage. I'll dap the dude up. Buy him a cold one. Everything will be good. Everything will be Gucci. Everything will be fine. And then his dad runs out and he yells that the kid is actually 17. Now, mind you, if New Jack knew that to begin with, he obviously wouldn't put himself in this predicament. But considering that this is now being outed after New Jack did it, now two things are happening at once. One, New Jack is trying to keep kayfabe, and two, New Jack feel like he just got played. You put me in a predicament where I had to blade a kid and I didn't even know his age and he ends up being a kid? Oh, hell nah. Hell nah. If I'm gonna go out, I'm gonna go out with a bang. Because that's just how New Jack thought. That's just New Jack's mentality, right? And then the kid gets carted off and he uses it to get heat. Now, it sounds fucking stupid. It sounds insanely childish. But it's just to give a bit of a reflection off of all this as far as how I feel what happened. I always thought about this. I always thought that, New Jack just kind of looked at that like they trying to sabotage him. And he's going to use it in order to flip the script a little bit. And hey, if anything were to happen to me, this is my last hurrah. This is how I go out. And in future interviews, New Jack never really forgot that. He probably thought to himself the kid had it out for him. Oh, all of a sudden you want me to blade for you? Oh, all of a sudden this, all of a sudden that. And knowing New Jack, because he is that fucking crazy, he probably did tie it up to some type of racial thing, most likely. And he never forgave the kid for that. Eric, he did go on to pass away. I think he died from surgery, right? Right? I think he had like a liposuction or something like that. Something along the lines of liposuction or bypass surgery or whatever. He ended up passing away from that like a couple of years later. He wasn't that young. I mean, he wasn't even that much older than what he was right now. He probably died like in 01, 02, 03, or 04, around that time frame. But yeah, later on, New Jack did go on to say some things, I think in a tweet or something like that, saying that he did not care about the kid, saying that was on him, he should have died. Just ignorant, goofy shit like that. But at the same time, I'm just here to kind of beam you into the mind of New Jack and to say that Jack probably thought he was getting fucked over. And hey, if you're going to try to fuck him over, then he's going to do everything in his power to be as offensive as possible because now he wants to fuck you over. Obviously, New Jack is no longer around. He died a couple of years ago. And looks like God fucked him over, right? Just saying. Number 8, the finger poke of doom. Now, this is a little bit more controversial because I think most people are going to probably be like, well, Devontae, would you necessarily put this on par with a kid getting his head sliced open? Would you put this on par with, making fun of necrophilia? Not necessarily. But like I said, when it comes to the 50 most controversial moments in professional wrestling history, I'm not just going to look at the aspect of what is considered more gruesome than the next story. That plays a part, that has an element within it, obviously, but with all things that comes, at least from how I judge things, there's a bit of a pound for pound effect when I judge things, right? Some things may be more gruesome than the other, but doesn't have that much notoriety. Therefore, why would I give it that much notoriety, or at least cement its legacy when it doesn't have that much notoriety? It's like when you see wrestling fans say this backyard match is the greatest match in the history of professional wrestling. Okay, true that, and nobody knows what the fuck it is. So why would I put that over Undertaker and Shawn Michaels? You know what I mean? Kind of like that same effect. And that's how I look at the finger poke of doom as far as its place in professional wrestling, when having to kind of ask yourself whether or not it was super duper controversial. Of course it was. It was arguably, if I had to give it the equivalent for people who are, I'm pretty sure the majority of you, especially if you're watching this video, you're very aware of the finger poke of doom. But I think you aren't aware of the consequences as far as what it had versus what it didn't have. You know what I mean? So just to kind of give a bit of a backstory with the finger poke of doom, no, it was not the final death knell in WCW. I think that's taken way too much at face value when talked about. Most likely because, WWE and the narrative machine, the propaganda machine, they spin this whole narrative and they spit it out there and they tell you, hey, this is how this actually went down. When no, not necessarily. Now, did it affect WCW? You goddamn right it affected WCW. But the whole narrative of it changed the trajectory of WWE, no, it didn't. WWE were kicking their asses for like months at that point. I think the last time WCW got a W on them, I think that would have been because the whole thing that happened with Halloween Havoc, and they pulled the show off the air because all the matches went on way too long, so people never got the opportunity to watch DDP versus Goldberg in the main event. So they re-aired specifically that match in itself for free on television. That was the last time that they won in a ratings battle, and that was back in like October of '98, like right before Halloween, hence Halloween Havoc. From that point on, like the road to Survivor Series, the Deadly Games, from that point going forward, that was it. WCW never won again. Mind you, again, that was like 2 months prior to, because really, that's something else no one ever talks about too. January 4th, that was when the episode aired, but everybody was home. You know what I mean? Everybody, during that time frame, everybody was with their families for Christmas and stuff like that. So the episode aired on January 4th, but in reality, it was taped like December 28th or December 29th. You know what I mean? As a matter of fact, ironically enough, as of this recording, we're coming up on the 26th, and we technically have passed the 26th anniversary, but the 26th year anniversary is coming up when it aired in about 2 more days as of this recording right here, right? But that's one narrative that they like to tell, that WWE, this is what, no, that right there was when the trajectory actually happened in November of 1998. That's one thing. And then the second thing is, from January going forward, right before, I want to say June or May, WCW was still doing pretty decent numbers, like in the 5s. Like they were still up there. They were still active. They didn't beat WWE anymore, but they were still actively competing with them up until like May. That's when WWE got fucking crazy massive. And that's when they started hitting the 6s and the 7s and the 8s and shit like that. And that's when they left, WCW in the dust. Like right when you got around the higher power storyline, right when you, ironically enough, got around when Owen passed away, that's when the numbers started to hit the roof. No pun intended. But with WCW, they were still doing very good numbers. Very, very, very good numbers. Just not better than WWE. So it's like this whole narrative, this is when they started to collapse. No, it didn't. But nevertheless, it's something worth pointing out because it is one of the biggest blunders in professional wrestling history, and it's probably one of the more idiotic things that WCW has ever done. But I get the thought process as to why they did it. it just didn't work out the way they thought it would. And I think they completely underestimated how popular at that time, because, you know, they had Hogan, they had the NWO, they had Sting, they had Bret, they had all the big names. They really, really, really underestimated how popular the WWE superstars got over at that point in time. I think that was their biggest mistake. But nevertheless, though, the whole story goes, Mick Foley ended up having a match with The Rock, right? This has been building up for a while. Obviously, as I mentioned before, this is coming off of the Deadly Games tournament. Vince McMahon already turned on Mick Foley. The Rock, at that point in time, was a babyface for a little bit. He had a heel run in his own right with the Nation of Domination. And for a little bit, like September to, well, the Deadly Games tournament, he started to get massively massive. This is when Rock really, really, really started to become The Rock after SummerSlam, when Triple H had his injury after the ladder match. And this was somewhat unique at the time, probably unique even for today's standards, because it's like, you don't get a guy who's getting that hot. Like, Rock was getting super duper duper hot. I mean, like, the best way to describe it, honestly, this will be the equivalent of, for an example, Bryan Danielson, right? Which I guess they technically kind of did. They just didn't commit to it. But, like, imagine if Daniel Bryan was getting super duper over in the manner of how he was getting over in the beginning of 2014, right? Late 2013, later 2014, he got super over, right? And then he joined the Wyatt family, right? Okay, that's technically kind of what they did with The Rock. But my thing is, imagine Bryan Danielson doing what he did with the Wyatt family and the, you know, the cage spot, when he gets on the cage and he starts to dictate the audience and he does the whole yes thing and the crowd does it with him, and he was like super fucking over at that point. Imagine being that over and then flipping Bryan Danielson heel. You know what I mean? Not flipping him heel while he was peaking going into the Wyatt family. No, now he's at his peak and you flip him heel. That's what they did with The Rock. Rock was even probably, the only person who was more over than The Rock in the entire wrestling business was Austin, right? Not even the NWO. I will argue that Rock at that point was getting more hot than the NWO. And then when you get to the Deadly Games tournament in November, they just flipped The Rock, which was very, very unique. I don't think they've ever done that before. To take a guy who's getting massively over to that degree and just flip him, that's crazy. That's really, really crazy when you think about it. And then when they flipped him, they used that in order to have him turn on Mick Foley. Him and Foley feuded for a little bit. They had a match at Rock Bottom the following month at In Your House. And they just continued to build this up, screwing over Mick Foley left and right, screwing him over. The Rock is now the corporate champion, you know, all this stuff. Austin had a bit of a break after the whole stuff, because he really wasn't on Raw all too much, you know what I mean? He was, but he wasn't. You know, like, he did the stuff with Taker for a little bit, but even then, he wasn't really on all the episodes. I'm not sure if it was because he took a legitimate vacation or if it had more to do with his next stuff. But Austin was gone for a few weeks. You know what I mean? They even did after Rock Bottom with the whole Buried Alive match with Taker. He was gone for like damn near a month. No one ever talks about that. That's why he got such a huge pop when he came out. He was gone for like a month. You did not see Austin on television again for like 3 weeks or up to a month after the Buried Alive match with Taker in December. He was gone pretty much the entire December after that. But that built up to the match with Rock and Mick Foley. Rock and Mick Foley had their match for the WWE Championship. You had the corporation on one side. DX was watching Mick Foley's back, and all this stuff started to go down, right? And on the opposite end for WCW, they were burying WWE, right? They were having some matches on television, and they were like kind of like interspersing it within the show, telling everybody the results of what was happening on Raw, saying that there's a guy named Mick Foley who goes by Mankind, or I think he went by Cactus Jack in WCW, and they were saying like, oh, he used to work for the company, now he works for the competition, don't watch that, it sucks, they suck, they're garbage, they're trash. They're just burying WWE, but in the process, they're also burying Mick Foley by saying he's a fucking nobody, right? And in the process, they're trying to promote this match with Hogan versus Kevin Nash. And this whole thing is because of Goldberg and the whole stuff that happened with the taser at Starrcade. Like, what was that? Like the previous night, right? What was that? Monday? That would have been the previous night at Starrcade. And they're trying to build this up to be a big deal. Well, recorded, obviously. This would have been a week prior to this, because Starrcade, I think, in '98 was in December 28th, December 29th, around that time frame. Nevertheless, though, that all went down, and Hogan was trying to do this whole storyline where he was going to run for president or some shit, right? Yeah, it's the 90s, folks. Just fucking go for it. Just go with the flow, okay? Well, Hogan put a pause on that, and he came back to take on Kevin Nash. And he took on Kevin Nash for the WCW Championship in the main event. And one of the things that Tony Schiavone said was, talking about Mick Foley, was that they have this main event and they have that main event. And he said that with the Mick Foley match, that's going to put, and he said it in a very sarcastic manner, that's going to put some butts in the seat. And then he scoffed at it, right? Well, Foley ended up winning the WWE Championship in one of the most memorable moments in WWE history. You get the massive pop from Stone Cold Steve Austin, one of the greatest pops in the history of pro wrestling, coming out. The audience is losing their shit. You can't even hear Austin's theme song. Hits The Rock with the chair. Foley pins him. He wins the WWE Championship. He does the whole little Rocky gimmick with the Adrian I Did It shit. And, just a fantastic moment. And then on WCW, you have Kevin Nash put a finger in Hogan's chest, and they played it up. Very similar, which no one ever talks about. It's not as if DX did the same thing like a year prior to this in like the 97 Christmas episode. They did the exact same thing. The only difference is the scales are way more massive. You're doing it with the European Championship. Granted, the WWE Champion is still involved and it's still the main event, but, the audience was not the same. The stakes weren't the same. The storyline implications weren't the same. But it still was hypocritical for WWE to play it up like what WCW did was a bad thing, when you literally did the exact same thing a year prior with DX and Triple H and Shawn Michaels. But nevertheless, though, that's what happened with Hogan and Kevin Nash. They did the DX thing, and, they played it up for shits and giggles. But I think also what bothers everybody is that they went right back to the NWO shit, because around this time, that's when they had the whole, obviously, the Wolfpack NWO versus the original black and white NWO, red and black versus black and white. They were trying to do the whole Crips and Blood shit. The thing is, you brought the NWO right back together, right? And now we're about to approach the 3-year anniversary since they started the whole NWO angle. And it's like, damn, you're doing the same shit again. Versus Raw at the time. That's when Raw was at its creative peak. That's when the Attitude Era was fucking the Attitude Era. And it's like, you're going to put the NWO back together and you're going to try to put that up against Rock and Austin? Like, it just felt like very, it was just like so boring. That was the biggest problem. And I'm not saying it was boring to me necessarily. Even though my brother was more of a WCW fan, I was more of a WWE fan. I'll just watch, at the time, I'll watch WCW if it happens to be, like, WWE happens to be on commercial. Like, I'll watch it in my room. My little brother will watch it in the living room, and then I'll go see what's going on television just to pass the time until WWF came back on. He'll do the same thing too, but that's how I kept up with it. But it wasn't necessarily boring, I want to say that, but just in comparison to WWF, at least for me at the time, I thought it was like, okay, well, this is kind of boring. You know what I mean? But yeah, the finger poke of doom, one of the most controversial moments in wrestling history, but I would definitely say completely overblown as far as the aftermath and the historical prominence as far as how they set it up for it to be. Yes, super controversial. Yes, historical in its value. As far as what not to do in professional wrestling, no. It was not the end of WCW, and it wasn't the beginning of the dominance of WWE. That's just historical fucking rewriting bullshit. Number 7, the steroid scandal. So, I'm going to read this article for you just to give you a bit of a backstory, even though I talked about this in the past. And even though I talked about this in the past, and I'm going to read it here, if you want to get a little bit more analytical about all this, I highly recommend, it should be in my miscellaneous playlist, if I'm not mistaken. I cover the entire 6-part Netflix ordeal as far as the Vince McMahon story. I did that a couple of months ago. If you want to check it out, somewhere in my miscellaneous playlist to get a little bit more deeper into the whole Vince McMahon steroid trial. I have it even, with timestamps if you want to check it out. But just to kind of give you the bit of a gist, check it out. Anabolic steroids, often referred to as gas or juice, were used by certain wrestlers throughout the era to achieve levels of muscle mass and larger-than-life appearances. At their core, steroids are used to help build muscle mass by acting like testosterone, helping build tissue. Steroid use has been banned in the US since 1990. In WWF, a wellness policy was enacted in 1987 for recreational drugs after Hacksaw Jim Duggan and the Iron Sheik were arrested for drunk driving and cocaine possession, but the company was still not testing for steroid use. The trial of McMahon actually began in 1994, but the events leading up to his almost downfall are equally as important. Alleged steroid use in WWF began in 1984 when the company began working with a state-appointed ringside medic, a urologist from Hershey, Pennsylvania, named Dr. George Zahorian. Dr. George Zahorian began providing WWF stars with steroids for the next 5 years. Zahorian, a still practicing urologist in Pennsylvania to this day, was convinced he's still practicing to this very day? When was this article written? Out of curiosity. Wow, this was written last year, and he's still a doctor? I never knew that. That's crazy. Sorry, but continuing on. Zahorian, a still practicing urologist in Pennsylvania to this day, was convicted in 1991 of providing steroids to 37 WWF wrestlers and 43 professional wrestlers overall. It was revealed he was providing the drugs to McMahon's office in Stamford, Connecticut. Zahorian's office was raided by federal agents in March of 1990 prior to his trial, where Zahorian was allegedly found shredding documents. At the trial, superstar Billy Graham testified he had bought large quantities of steroids from the doctor before it became illegal to sell them in the 70s and 80s. Graham attributed his liver problems and sterility, among other issues, to steroid use. He testified he was addicted to steroids, citing depression when stopping the cycle as the reason why. Roddy Piper, another admitted user of steroids, once wrote the town of Hershey, famous for its chocolate factory, and I quote, was one of the wrestler's favorite vacation stops, end quote. At the time, it was revealed McMahon purchased steroids from Zahorian beginning in 1987, including to use for himself. Hulk Hogan was set to testify against Zahorian, but WWF's lawyer Jerry McDevitt was able to get the megastar out of appearing in court, and Hogan was initially listed as, and I quote, John Doe, end quote, in court documents to protect his identity. McDevitt said the two had a doctor-patient relationship, and Hogan consulted with Zahorian about other various medical issues, meaning testifying would, and I quote, compromise his medical privacy rights, end quote. During Zahorian's trial, the U.S. attorney presiding over the case said the doctor's lack of professional judgment with Graham was typical of his dealings with wrestlers. Zahorian was charged with 14 counts of illegally distributing steroids as well as prescription painkillers. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison. Steroids have been banned in the U.S. since the passing of the Anabolic Control Act of 1990. This means trafficking steroids is treated much in the same manner as trafficking a drug like cocaine. The act established penalties for people like coaches, advisors, or trainers who persuade others to use steroids. According to Congress, the act also defined anabolic steroid as any drug or hormonal substance that promotes muscle growth in a manner pharmacologically similar to testosterone, including specified substances. During the trial, McMahon said he used steroids, but only before they became illegal. After Zahorian's conviction, he cooperated with authorities, providing statements regarding giving steroids to the WWF and McMahon. McMahon was indicted in 1993, charged with possession of illegal steroids with intent to distribute, conspiring to distribute steroids, and embezzlement for allegedly using money from Titan Sports to purchase the drugs from Zahorian. McMahon initially faced 6 total charges, but 3 were thrown out before his time in court. And investigators in Pennsylvania were zeroing in on charging Zahorian, Linda McMahon sent a confidential memo to fellow executives within the company saying that a criminal investigation could be headed Zahorian's way. The news of McMahon tipping on Zahorian did not come to light until 2010 during the Republican Senate campaign in Connecticut, which also came back up again. They're not saying this now, but this is after the stuff with her now becoming part of Trump's cabinet. They brought this up a couple of weeks too, if you guys are curious about that. But continuing on. McMahon reportedly learned of the investigation from a federal prosecutor who tipped off a lawyer within WWF at a social event. And I quote, "Although you and I discussed before about continuing to have Zahorian at our events as the doctor on call, I think that now is not a good idea," McMahon, Linda by the way, wrote in the demo dated December 1st, 1989. Continuing on, "Vince agreed and would like for you to call Zahorian and to tell him not to come to any more of our events and also clue him in on any action that the Justice Department is thinking of taking," the DOJ. Allegedly, according to the federal prosecutors, an unnamed Titan Sports official, which reports state was Pat Patterson, called Zahorian and told him to destroy any evidence of his contact with the WWF. However, it said Patterson wanted to continue working with Zahorian after the investigation. Now we actually get into the court stuff. McMahon's case was heard in the United States District Court for the Eastern District of New York, not WWE's home in Connecticut, because prosecutors alleged the distribution of steroids happened in Long Island. Not to mention also, I'm pretty sure as far as bias is considered within the jurors, saying this myself, Devontae, that I'm pretty sure they didn't want to do it in Connecticut just for a hint of bias even being persuaded by the jurors at that time. If they had, I'm pretty sure they had jurors. Was it left up to the judge or was it left up to the jurors at that time? I'm not sure. But continuing on though. The trial lasted 18 days. The prosecution alleged McMahon was in charge of distributing steroids to his wrestlers, requiring them to take the drug to increase their physique. McMahon's lawyer said he only had a single discussion with Zahorian regarding McMahon's concern over wrestler health. The charges could have led to a $1.5 million fine and up to 11 years in prison. McMahon's case still went to trial, despite drug testing for steroids within the WWF beginning in 1991. The policy included a 6-week suspension for the first failure, another suspension, and a mandatory rehabilitation for the second failure, and termination for the third. Judge Jacob Mishler presided over the case. The legal team representing McMahon did not enter a defense, despite mentioning the only conversation McMahon and Zahorian allegedly had. During the trial, the judge dismissed the charges of distribution, ruling the prosecution did not provide enough evidence that occurred within the court's jurisdiction, which also probably helped because Hogan did take the stand eventually, and he did tell everybody that McMahon never gave him any steroids or did anything with him. Which is funny because I think also what ruined the case later on, I think in 95 or 94, was that Nels also took the stand. The same Nels that fought Vince at SummerSlam in 92 over his payout. He took the stand, and obviously he was out of his fucking mind, and obviously he wanted revenge on McMahon. He started saying that McMahon did indeed give him steroids. Now, I can't say whether or not that did or didn't occur, but people saying that Nels is completely out of his mind and clearly has motivation, that also helped Vince McMahon out as far as his verdict when it was all said and done. But continuing on. After 16 hours of deliberation, McMahon's not guilty verdict was announced on July 23rd, 1994. A week before my second birthday. Beautiful. Throughout the trial, testimony was provided by key witnesses, including various WWF wrestlers such as Hulk Hogan. Okay, there you go. Should have read this a little bit. Whatever. Hogan testified under immunity from prosecution. He regularly picked up steroids at WWF headquarters after calling McMahon's secretary, but also said he was never directed by anyone, including McMahon, within the company. Hogan said that the drugs were provided to him amongst things like a fan mail and paychecks, but he initially had taken steroids prescribed to him for medical issues. He testified that while not directed to take them, he did share steroids with McMahon during the 80s. Hogan said he had been taking the drugs for 14 years, but has never specified publicly when he stopped. Rick Rude, Tully Blanchard, the Warlord, the Ultimate Warrior were among others who took the stand. And then they talked about the fact that on Dark Side of the Ring in 2021, when asked if Warlord knew of the doctor who he was, he smirked and replied, "Oh yeah." He says Zahorian would always have a big doctor bag, but by his side, which would be full of steroids. He asked the wrestlers if there was anything they would like while treating them. And they would go on to talk more about this, and then they talk about the Nails situation, as I just referred to earlier, because Nails is a complete dumb fuck and he ruined all that. And then they talk about the policy changes that were instituted, especially after the death of Eddie, and then they started the whole busting everybody of steroids in 2007. Because I think Mr. Kennedy was involved in that. Edge, Adam Copeland, he was involved that also. That's why he got suspended for a little bit also in 2007. 2007 over the summer was a complete catastrophe, which we'll also get to one of those moments a little bit later on. But yeah, the whole steroid trial stuff, it didn't ruin Vince, but it also did put a disclaimer over Vince McMahon's head. It labeled WWE. People think that for some reason, I still don't understand the correlation, but for some reason people believe that the WWF and being linked to all the steroid stuff was a part of their downfall in the mid 90s during the New Generation era, where they were almost put out of business, especially with WCW coming aboard and stuff like that, which is stupid because WCW were just as in trouble with the ratings and the viewership number, even without anything engulfing them into any legitimate controversy. But again, it is what it is. It is still a very, very controversial moment in professional wrestling history because of all the things that were occurring at the moment and the light that is shined on a bunch of superstars who otherwise would have been perceived as just stereotypical cartoon characters that happen to be wrestling other half-naked men in a ring, and essentially being brought into questioning as to why they themselves are presented on television and the manner of how they're presented. And I don't know, I guess you could say that it ruined them at that point in time, if for nothing else, just based strictly off of just decorum. But I don't think anyone ever really cared for professional wrestlers in that manner. That's just me and the way I think. But regardless, nevertheless, the steroid trial, highly controversial and one of the most notable events to ever happen in probably the last 50 years of professional wrestling. Number 6, the Ring Boy scandal. Now, very similar to the steroid trial, I've talked about this. I have a whole video dedicated to this. I can't tell you what playlist I put it in because I can't remember. But if you type in Millennial Smark or Devontae Rackley and then put in Ring Boy, it should pop up automatically. I have an entire video dedicated to this a couple of months ago. So I'm not going to read any articles. I'm just going to go off the top of my head as far as giving you my interpretations, as I already talked about before, but have to do it again. It's a part of the list. It's very controversial. Got to talk about it. But this whole thing happened where this young man named Tom Cole was being brought in to help out building up the rings, pretty much being because it was him and it was a bunch of other young men. They're recruited by this guy named Mel Phillips to pretty much be ring boys, right? Build up the ring, get everything set up for the night, all this other kind of stuff. This was typically used to help bring in some of the people who weren't really keen on the wrestling business as far as knowing the ins and outs of it. This was the way they typically broke them in, right? And the thing is with Mel Phillips is that he did this countless amounts of times, right? In order to bring young teenage boys into the business in order to essentially sexually abuse them. Sometimes and when I say teen boys, I don't mean just like 16, 17. They could range in 18 to 19 range also. I just want to give a little more clarity to that. But essentially, he would bring them in and he would pretty much hold the prominence of, hey, you can be involved in WWE if you do some things for me. This was Mel Phillips, right? And there was another guy that was involved in all of this also named Terry Garvin. And he will also participate in some of these things also. If for nothing else, he will greenlight it, right? And Terry will also get some of these people to do things for him also, such as with the Cole gentleman. I know he tried to get him to give him head, right? This is according to Tom Cole. He said that Terry Garvin tried to solicit sexual advances, which essentially was him giving him head in order to stay within WWE and keep working with the company, right? And all the while, you have someone like Pat Patterson who knows all this is going on, and he's greenlighting all this, right? essentially turn his head because he himself is also a predator. Again, I got a whole video on this if you want to get the consensus a little bit more deeper. I highly recommend go type in Roddy Piper and Pat Patterson and look at his RF video, and you tell me whether or not Paul or Piper was not done dirty by a predator like Pat Patterson. But nevertheless, though, Tom Cole ended up pretty much saying that he didn't want to participate in any of these sexual advances, and he was eventually not asked back to help be a ring boy, and he brought it up to everyone's attention, right? This is also during the whole steroid trial that we just talked about in the previous entry. So there was another gentleman also who leveraged this against McMahon also. I think he himself was one of the TV announcers, right? If I'm not mistaken, or he has something to do with that. And he said he was also advanced on by either Phillips or Terry Garvin to also participate in sexual activities that he said that Vince McMahon was also familiar with, and he knew all this was going on along with Pat Patterson. The only difference is between Pat and Vince is that Vince never participated like Pat Patterson participated into some of these gross things, right? And this whole thing was called the Ring Boy scandal, right? Eventually, they did end up firing Mel Phillips. I think they fired Terry Garvin too, but I think they brought back one of them. One of those two got brought back, right? And I think the other one eventually got brought back a little bit later on, because Mel Phillips, he was an announcer. And something that took me by surprise also, call me racist all you want to, had no clue. I knew that now when I did the video in the beginning, the actual Ring Boy scandal video, but I had no clue Mel Phillips was black. No clue. No clue at all, bro. You know who he looks like a little bit? You guys ever seen that episode of he's actually been in a few episodes, but you guys ever seen Different Strokes? You know that episode where Dudley and what's the buddy's name again? Gary Coleman's character. What the hell his name is? When they get caught in the bike shop and that little fucking weirdo predator guy gets them to take his shirts off and he has them watching hentai and he's trying to molest them, and you see Dudley's dad. Dudley's dad looks like Mel Phillips a little bit, which kind of took me by surprise. I'm like, what the? Oh, Dudley's dad is a predator? He kind of looks like, maybe not. He might be dead right now. Mel Phillips is dead, but I'm not sure about Dudley's dad. But Dudley's dad is probably dead too. My point being is, though, the Ring Boy scandal was a huge controversy that came back to bite McMahon in the ass multiple times. And it came back to bite Linda in the ass too, because they brought that up a few weeks ago also, along with the steroid trial. But yeah, super controversial moment. It's one of the reasons why no one is willing to put over someone like a Pat Patterson as far as being one of the all-time greats. Because, well, although Pat Patterson is an all-time great as far as a creative mind, as far as what he's done for the wrestling business, as far as what his career actually meant to the wrestling business, especially in that California territory, especially, I would say also as far as like bringing prominence to Canadian wrestlers, it doesn't take away from this right here. It's always going to be an asterisk right next to his name because of this right here. But yeah, one of the more controversial moments in professional wrestling history, the Ring Boy scandal. Now we make it to the top 5 most controversial moments in professional wrestling history. Now I'm going to warn you guys, although you've probably seen it already because most of you motherfuckers most likely clicked on the timestamps and you skimmed through the video before actually watching it, which is your prerogative. That's fine. I still hate you though, but no, Devontae, not this kind of video. This is the serious video. The top 5 videos are very cliche. They're probably known. Maybe one spot you're not too familiar with, but outside of that, well, you're familiar with it, but you probably wouldn't have guessed whether or not it was in a top 5 spot. But the top 5, it is as cliche as you can make it out to be. But it really is the top 5 most controversial moments in professional wrestling history. And then in the number 5 spot, the infamous, or famous, depending how you look at it, right? King of the Ring, Hell in a Cell, 1998, The Undertaker, Mankind. Now, just prepare yourself. Some of these things have been talked to death already, and this is one of them. But how do you not include one of the scariest matches in professional wrestling history from a mainstream standpoint, and one of the most controversial moments in professional wrestling history? So just to kind of give a backlore to this, Undertaker and Mankind, Mick Foley, have been feuding on and off since 1996. You know, Foley made his debut attacking The Undertaker right after WrestleMania 12, like the night after. And they've had some few matches, obviously, going throughout 1996. You know, in my opinion, one of my favorite matches happened in King of the Ring. That's just my opinion, though. People may have a different opinion. I love their King of the Ring 96 match. But they also had other matches, too, stemming off of SummerSlam, the Boiler Room Brawl, and all that other kind of stuff. Obviously, you get the Buried Alive match. Great matches, right? And Foley was one of the few people, if not the first person, to really take it to The Undertaker like that. Before that, Undertaker was seen to be somewhat impervious, right? Before Foley, it took a gang of people, no matter the size of the wrestler. You know, you can have someone like a Yokozuna or a Kamala, and it didn't matter. You still had a bunch of people, a bunch of heels who always ganged up on The Undertaker. He never really had a fair advantage. Whereas Foley, now, granted, he eventually got Paul Bearer, but essentially, Foley did everything on his own when taking it to Taker, and no one has ever really done that before. One-on-one, 1v1, straight up head-to-head. No one's ever taken it to Taker like that before Foley came into the picture, right? And they had a few more matches, even after 96, when he got Paul Bearer, Foley that is, right? Because that's when Taker did his thing with the Executioner. A different Terry. This is Terry Gordy. Don't get it confused. Terry Garvin is the pedophile. Terry Gordy is one of the former members of the Fabulous Freebirds, and he was under the Execution mask. He took on The Undertaker at It's Time, the In Your House show. And that's when you started again in 97. Taker became WWE champion after he beat Sid at WrestleMania 13. And they had an excellent match. You gotta watch when you get the opportunity. It had a great spot with Foley taking a stair shot off the apron through the announcement table. It was fucking awesome. Taker and Foley had a match at Revenge of the Taker in 97. The same match, the same night where Austin and Brett main evented. That's a fantastic fucking match. But essentially, that was pretty much it throughout 1997 for Foley and Taker, because Foley ended up turning face not too long afterwards. He turned face around like June of 97, June of 97. That's when he did his whole Dude Love gimmick, and he was helping out Austin around the time while Taker was still doing his WWF Championship run, right? Eventually, obviously, as you know, Taker lost the belt to Bret Hart at SummerSlam when Shawn Michaels fucked him over with the steel chair shot heard around the world. Taker did his thing with Shawn Michaels a little bit, Hell in a Cell. Foley was kind of, he was helping Triple H get over, and then he did some stuff a little tiny bit in 97. I know he was supposed to have the match with Pillman at Bad Blood, but obviously Pillman passed away, so that never happened. And, as they continued on, Taker, he started to feud with Kane. Foley, he reverted back to Cactus Jack, and he was teaming up with Chainsaw Charlie, the late Terry Funk, when they started to take on the New Age Outlaws throughout the latter portions of 97 into the early mid portions of 98. Eventually, Foley himself started to feud with Austin as Dude Love again. He reverted back to the Dude Love gimmick after Cactus Jack, and Austin, or Taker, he continued feuding on with Kane a little bit going into Unforgiven. Foley, as Dude Love, did his thing with Austin. Taker did his thing with Kane to finish off their feud for a little bit at Unforgiven in the Inferno match. And then we go into May, and this is when things start to kick up a little bit for Taker and Foley, right? Because even though Foley was still doing this thing with Austin, Taker was making it very much known that he wanted a title shot, right? And it got to a point where Taker ended up siding and helping Stone Cold Steve Austin out and his whole little feud with the corporation, as it's now starting to be called, with now Austin is taking on Foley, and now, obviously in the background you got McMahon, you got Patterson, you got Briscoe, hell, even for a minute you had Sergeant Slaughter, and they were all combining, trying to take out Austin. Eventually, you have Undertaker, who sides with Austin, and he didn't necessarily screw over Foley as far as touching him, but he screwed him over in the sense that he sided with Austin to help him out, because that's when Taker took out the corporation. This is all that Over the Edge. Another excellent match with Austin and Dude Love. They had 2 back-to-back great fucking matches. Although I hate that finish with the count from Vince McMahon. I thought that was fucking stupid, but nevertheless though, that's what kind of gave leeway to Taker and Foley coming back again and having their match at King of the Ring, right? Taker, or Austin, is doing his thing with Kane in the First Blood match. Taker is now taking on Foley in the Hell in a Cell match. And going into this match, Taker had a fucked up foot, right? So it was kind of like, okay, the spots that Foley wants to do is going to involve Taker having to climb his big ass up on top of that Hell in a Cell, which, you know, they wanted to make it a little bit different. Foley said that he wanted to take certain bumps to differentiate this match versus the match that happened with him and Shawn in '97, because as we all know, that's an all-time classic, one of the greatest matches of all time. And Foley said to himself, there's no way on just based strictly off of athleticism that he can never compete with that match with Shawn Michaels. So he felt like he had to be a little bit different just to stand out, because otherwise that match is going to overshadow his match with Taker. Not to mention, even though Taker did get himself involved into the match at Over the Edge with, you know, Austin and Foley, one, that was Taker and Austin's feud, right? Even within this match with Foley and Taker in Hell in a Cell, this was still technically within the feud with Taker and Austin. Hence why Taker fucked over Austin in the main event with Kane in the First Blood match. So Taker Foley kind of felt like the feud with him and Taker was kind of cold. They had history, but it was still very, very cold going into a match like this, right? At least that's how he felt. So he wanted to differentiate himself, and he started to talk to Terry Funk as far as spitballing ideas as to what he wants to do. He brings up the Funk that, hey, I could probably take a bump off the Hell in a Cell, which Funk thought he was crazy, but Foley thought if he can kind of time it right, maybe he wouldn't get too hurt. He kind of figured he was going to get fucked up either way, but he figured if he could pull it off in a certain way, he wouldn't get too fucked up, right? Well, that's what happened. Foley ends up starting the match on top of the Hell in a Cell. You know, Taker sees Foley up there. He gets up there with him. And you can already see things were already going to be somewhat catastrophe. You know, it was going to be catastrophe because, you know, before they even do the Hell in a Cell bump, they're like walking towards the edge. And I guess because the way they manufacture the roof to let it sink in, because he was going to do the chokeslam spot and it was supposed to make an indent on the cage. We'll get to that in a minute. Taker and Foley started to walk, and you know, you forget sometimes that both of these guys combined probably make up well over 600 pounds, right? So as they're stepping on each of these fences, going over the columns to make themselves way towards the edge of the Hell in a Cell, because of how it was designed, the fences started to snap off, right? As you can see, they're walking up the Hell in a Cell roof, and one section, it actually pops because there's so much fucking weight there. And initially, I think Foley wanted to do a suplex spot on Taker, but Taker was like, hell no, this shit is breaking, hell no. So Taker started to punch him in the gut, and they went directly into the finish, right? Or the earlier spot, where Taker, as you all know, the iconic footage, the iconic picture, the iconic spot, Taker throws Foley off the Hell in a Cell roof. Foley goes through the announcement table down below. It was not anything that was crazy as far as what was injured on Foley. From what I believe, I think Foley kind of expected, the way he talks and what he implies, I think he expected there's something happening to him, which something did happen. He ended up separating his shoulder off that bump, but nothing that was terribly drastic. You know, it sucked, but you know, it didn't suck enough where Foley didn't show up the Raw the next night and still competed. I think he competed the next night on Raw, either that or the following week. But nevertheless, though, you know, they cleared off all the debris. It was crazy. You know, no one's ever seen anything like that before, obviously. They replayed it like 10 more fucking times because they couldn't believe what the hell they just seen. It was crazy. It was iconic. One of the greatest spots, probably the greatest spot in wrestling history. Foley gets taken away on the stretcher, and Taker is still on top of the Hell in a Cell. He's trying to climb back down, and as he's climbing back down, Foley makes his way off the stretcher, and you can see he has this look in his face, like this determined look in his face that he needs to finish this match. He gets back on top of the Hell in a Cell. Taker follows suit. He follows him on top of the Hell in a Cell, and they fight a little bit longer for a couple of seconds before Taker ends up choke slamming Foley on top of the Hell in a Cell roof, which caved in on itself, and Foley went through the roof, and he ended up knocking himself unconscious legitimately. Which with that spot, as I said beforehand, the cage was supposed to be an indent. He wasn't supposed to go through the roof in itself. It was just supposed to like make an indent, an impression, like you see in the video games where like you try to, I mean, maybe not in the newer ones, but in the older ones, it took a couple of tries to put someone through a Hell in a Cell roof, and it would like slowly show you how the roof is kind of caving in before it actually breaks. That's what was supposed to happen with Foley. Unfortunately, I guess they forgot that they stepped on the roof of the cage and it popped the fences, and well, Foley, he remembered, or maybe he forgot afterwards, but he took that spot and he went through the cage, which was two of the most horrific spots in professional wrestling history. They both happened in the same match, which is fucking insane. Even more insane is they continued the match. It was one shot where you could see Foley, you know, he's sitting in the corner, you know, Taker tried to go for old school, and, you know, because this, like, while they were, like, trying to see whether or not Foley was alive, according to them, you know, Terry Funk, he was trying to play it off, and he told Taker to choke slam him, and, like, you know, Taker choke slammed him out of his shoes, and just to kind of build heat and kind of, you know, like, hey, we need some stuff going on because there's just too much focus on Foley right now. We need to give Foley a chance to recuperate himself because Foley said he wants to continue. Taker tried to go for an old school, you know, the walk on ropes, when then Foley kind of clipped him off. And Foley is in the corner, and you can see him smiling, and there's a tooth coming out of his nose while there's blood gushing out of his mouth, which clearly tells me that, you know, he knocked his tooth out, which that happened because there was a chair underneath Foley and Taker when that chokeslam spot happened, and when Foley came through the roof, you could see the chair coming right behind Foley, and I guess on the way down it hit him in the face. I think that's actually what knocked him unconscious, if anything else, was the fact that there's like a 10-pound chair coming off from a distance hitting you directly in the damn face. That probably knocked him out more than the actual hit in the back of his head on the mat did. Just craziness. And, you know, you had Taker doing a suicide dive, which is crazy in its own right, and missing. You know, they used stairs. Foley ended up hitting the cactus power driver on Taker on top of a chair. Taker's busted open. And they had the audacity, because this is the first time I've ever seen this spot before, too, in my entire life. They pulled out thumbtacks. Foley pulled out which actually meant something back in those days. And he ended up taking not one bump on the thumbtacks, but also a choke slam into the thumbtacks, and then it ended with Taker hitting a tombstone power driver in order to win the match. And it's just one of those matches. It's one of those things that people look at to this very day, and it's crazy that WWE were able to get away with it. You know, but it's 1998. And regulations and rules, as far as these things are concerned, weren't really put into practice. They want to get away with this now. There's just no way. The Hell in a Cell, just the first bump in itself would have fucking did it. But especially the second bump. The second bump would have absolutely fucking did it. Especially on those rings back in the days. That's before Vince started wrestling. Remember, those rings didn't really start changing to the way you see them right now until Vince got in the ring after 99. So imagine the kind of bump that Foley took on the hard version of the fucking rings back in the days. But a very iconic match, nonetheless. Obviously, one of the greatest matches of all time. It stands the test of time. You can still watch it to this very day, and it has so much replay value. Didn't quite put Foley on the map as people said that it did. Even Foley would tell you that himself. It didn't quite put him on the map. He didn't really get on the map until the Sacco stuff. But still, nevertheless, it definitely scorched up the war, if you will, a lot more back then. And like I said, it still stands the test of time as one of the most controversial moments in wrestling history. Number 4, wait for it, folks, Wait for it. I know. The Montreal screw job. If you had $1, right? If you had $1, raise your hand. I can't be the only one. This is probably, raise your hand if this is your 100th time in your entire life listening to someone talk about the motherfucking Montreal screw job. I know. I'm as tired of it as you are. And trust me, if I can help it, this will absolutely be my last time talking about it. Until the next time I talk about it, which hopefully will be very, 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 very. I don't want to talk about this again until like the 30th anniversary, if I can help it, which is like in what, 5 more years? No, I'm sorry, 2 more years. Damn, that's crazy. 1987 is almost 30 years ago. But nevertheless, though, the Montreal screw job. Obviously, you know the backstory to it. Shawn, Bret, me no likey you, you no likey me. They get into fights backstage, all the toxic turmoil stuff that has happened. 2 friends that used to be homebros, they used to have cookouts at each other's houses in the early 90s, or at least Shawn goes, he went to Bret's house. So they were good friends. You know, Bret always wanted to put over Shawn Michaels, knowing that he was going to be escalated to the top of the tier. I mean, I know Bret and Jim Neidhart said that they wanted to put over the Rockers because they knew that Bret was going to kind of do his thing with the Intercontinental Championship stuff. And then when Bret did that, he wanted to put Shawn over even more, as he was going to go be WWF champion. He wanted to put him over as the Intercontinental champion, right? And then Bret allegedly did this again when he was going to go do the whole, you know, Lonesome Dove stuff, and he wanted to put Shawn over as the WWF champion, or at least, you know, he is, because leave it up to Bret. It's not that he didn't mind doing the job to Shawn Michaels. It's just that, like, the transition between him and Shawn Michaels kind of made him feel like he was being written out of the picture. And he didn't like that all too much. He didn't like feeling like a transitional champion. Like, hey, I get it. You want Shawn to be the guy now. I get it. He's younger than me. Not by a lot, but still, nevertheless, you know, Shawn and Bret, they have like a 6-year difference from each other, right? I think Shawn and Bret are like 6 or 7 years different in age. But nevertheless, though, not too much further in age. But Bret understood it, right? If for anything else, Bret had a certain philosophy about his wrestling versus Shawn's philosophy about wrestling. And he knew the direction that WWF was going to go into, and he knew that he didn't feel comfortable being in that position, knowing that the direction they were going to go into versus Shawn was perfectly fine being in that position. So he got it. He understood it. He just didn't want to be transitioned out in favor of someone else to look like a fucking jobber to the stars, essentially. Well, Shawn ended up having his 96 run, and you could say metrically compared to Bret's, it wasn't as successful, but there are multiple things I think you should take into context when comparing Shawn to Bret, because I don't want to just review the Montreal Screwjob like everybody else. I want to kind of give a backstory to this. With Shawn, always take into context 2 things as far as a comparison to Bret. 1, Bret was not the main guy leaned on when he was WWF champion. He wasn't. He simply wasn't the main guy leaned on. You know, one can argue that he was the first ever mid-card world champion, right? I love Bret to death, but Bret was not the guy leaned on in 92, and 93, and 94. He wasn't. He simply wasn't. Hogan was coming back into the picture in 93. Lex Luger, they were priming for that position in 93. Yokozuna was the top heel. He just wasn't primed for that spot. In 92, he didn't even, did he? Yeah, no, he did main event Survivor Series. But him main event in Survivor Series, I think that came, because the semi-main event that everybody really cared about was the Macho Man. Well, it was supposed to be Macho Man and the Ultimate Warrior versus Flair and Razor Ramon before the whole steroid shit. And then it ended up being Macho Man and Mr. Perfect versus Flair and Razor Ramon, right? And the whole angle that happened when Perfect turned face, everybody cared more about that match than they did Bret and Shawn Michaels in the main event of Survivor Series in 92. And then obviously you go into 94, I'm trying to think about it, but Bret did a main event SummerSlam in '94. That's when Taker came back, and they did the whole Naked Gun shit with Taker, and you know, the whole fake Taker versus real Taker story. Bret didn't, which by the way, he absolutely should have fucking main evented with Owen. That's the best. That's one of the best matches in the history of that company. Easily the best steel cage match of all time. It's not to say that Bret shouldn't, or that Bret. I'm just giving observational points. I'm saying Bret should have main evented, but he didn't. He always had someone, which you can make an argument he didn't need that, but he always did have someone to kind of lean on a little tiny bit. Versus Shawn, he didn't have that. He didn't have that. There was nobody for Shawn to lean on. Actually, that was one of Shawn's complaints. He didn't like the fact that when Bret dropped the belt to him, he went to go do his own thing, and he legitimately had no one to lean on. You know, Diesel and Razor already went to WCW. Bret was gone. The only person he had to necessarily work with from a name perspective that he could have would have been Taker, but Taker was doing his thing with Foley. So Shawn legitimately had no one to work with throughout 1996. That didn't give him his own rivalry. The closest thing you could probably think of was the Camp Cornette stuff with, you know, Bulldog here and there and Vader here and there, but he had no one to legitimately sink his teeth into as far as a rivalry is considered. Never, period, point blank. The closest thing you got to was Psycho Sid, and by that point you were already at the tail end of Shawn Michaels' reign as a world champion. And you know, eventually Shawn did drop the belt to Psycho Sid, and then Bret did come back. He had his classic with Austin at Survivor Series, and they did their own thing separately for a minute. Bret, you know, doing this feud with Austin, doing the un-American stuff. And Shawn, he lost his smile, must smile, must smile. Devontae, this is serious. No joking. No joking. That's on your other videos. He lost his smile. And apparently, he ended up having a career-ending knee injury. When in reality, you listen to the other reports, apparently Bret was supposed to have a rematch with Shawn, and Shawn was going to drop the belt back to Bret, but Shawn didn't want to do the favors for Bret, because again, I think he was still angry at I mean, they already had backstage heat already, but Shawn kind of felt like, you know, hey, you're not going to help me out during my reign, why should I help you out to get your reign back? It's probably how Shawn looked at it, because he's fucking immature as shit at the time. I mean, but then again, one can argue, but that wasn't even Bret's agenda. So yeah, Shawn was being stupid fucking immature. I mean, they both were, but especially Shawn. But all this heat started to build up after a while. You know, you started getting certain comments about Bret Hart and his relationships with his family. You know, saying that he cheated on Bret for Sonny because Shawn was pissed off because he kind of felt like Bret kind of talked a little bit too much and purposely sabotaged the Sweet Chin music spot that was not caught on television. That's why Shawn retaliated with the Sunny Day spot, which Bret wanted to fucking kill Shawn over. And they ended up, you know, kind of fighting a little bit backstage, had a pull apart with Bret pulling out Shawn's hair. And they just didn't want to work with each other. They just didn't like each other. Shawn threatened to go to WCW, which was not going to happen because he was still under contract. And Vince just laughed that shit off and told him to go chill for a minute, which Shawn did. Hence why Shawn was not inside the Canadian Stampede match, if you guys ever cared. And you know, that was after Shawn and Bret had their falling out in the locker room stuff. And he had to take a little bit of a hiatus because of that. But he came back, and him and Bret, you know, they decided to work together. They hated each other, but they decided to work together, and they did the whole SummerSlam stuff, right? And then, you know, Bret got the belt back, but still Shawn was out for blood at that time when it came to the Harts, and, you know, there was a spot that was supposed to happen with him and British Bulldog at one of the one night only events overseas. It was international in the UK, where Shawn, who did not need the belt because it's a mid-card belt and he's a main eventer, he ended up taking the European Championship for British Bulldog after British Bulldog dedicated that win to his sister who was dying from cancer. Shawn ended up taking the European Championship belt off of British Bulldog, again, just for the sake of heat. That's what he claims. In reality, I think he just wanted to fuck with the Harts even more, but that's just my opinion. They continue on going into October, and it started to get really heated up. Shawn is doing more of the Degeneration X stuff. They're starting to become a thing. And Bret is becoming more and more and more disillusioned to all that. This is stemming off of the whole fact that in 96, a year prior, Vince, he agreed to give Bret a 20-year contract, right? I forgot what it was worth, but he decided to give him a 20-year contract worth millions of dollars. And now he wanted to break that agreement because he had a direction as to where he wanted to go into with the Attitude Era stuff. And he came to Bret and he told Bret, hey, you might want to go do a deal with WCW, because originally they were going to give Bret a contract for like $3 million a year prior, but Bret turned it down because he was comfortable in WWE. And Bret is, honestly, I love Bret, but he's such a fucking mark that he thought to himself that, hey, the guys in WCW, they were going to ruin me, without thinking about the money. Now, I get it in hindsight, obviously, but at least at that time, vision-wise, I still think Bret was being a mark over that shit. Like, dude, take the fucking money. Stop it. But then again, if he was comfortable, I'm not going to say that. I guess being comfortable takes precedent over your value. But nevertheless, though, Vince talked Bret into talking to Eric to get that deal back, which he did, and he did get that deal back. And he was primed to put the championship belts on Shawn Michaels, right? They started doing all these shoots with each other, you know, very disparaging remarks being made about Bret Hart, and Bret Hart shooting it back at, you know, DX. You know, he would call them homophobic, or he would call them, I can't say the words, but he would call them homophobic slurs. This is coming off of even when DX accused Bret Hart and the Hart Foundation of being racist. Yes, this is a thing that's occurring in real time, yes. And it culminated in their match at Survivor Series. Obviously, Bret at this point in time, because there was this situation that happened with Bret saying that he didn't mind doing the honors for Shawn, and Shawn, in retaliation for some fucking reason, said back to him that he wouldn't do the honors for him. No, I mean, I get Shawn being a dick and maybe he was in his feelings about something at the time, but to say something like that right back to the guy for no reason, knowing Bret's motto, it was just so fucking dumb. No clue why he thought that was a smart thing to say back in retaliation. Obviously, Bret felt disrespected, and as a man, he was like, hey, I'm not going to put this guy over after he said all this shit to me. And they try to kind of come up with whatever plan to kind of have Bret drop the belt amicably to Shawn, which Bret denied everything. He was even willing to, you know, have the belt dropped to him via Ken Shamrock, or drop the belt to Shamrock or to Austin, just anybody but Shawn Michaels, especially in Canada. Which with Bret Hart, he said it wasn't, and I seen this not too long ago on WWE Vote with his interview with Stone Cold Steve Austin. I can't remember what he said verbatim, but he said it had nothing to necessarily do with Canada per se. It was just more so like an excuse, because he was looking at it like, hey, look, Shawn just doesn't want to drop the belt to me. I need an excuse in order to just have something out there, just so, because he's like, his whole thing was like, he just wants to see Shawn, you know, give him the same respect. Like, we're in Canada right now. Are you willing to do the honors for me in my hometown? If you're willing to do that, you get my respect back, and then, hey, I'm willing to do business with you. That's how Bret looked at it. It wasn't necessarily the Canada hometown thing. It was more so like, hey, are you willing to respect me by doing the job to me in my country? And if yes, then you've gained my respect back somewhat, at least enough for me to want to drop the belt back to you. I need to know if you're going to do for me what I'm willing to do for you, as you said you wouldn't do. That was Bret's whole gripe. So when you hear people say, oh, it's Canada, you know, what's the difference between dropping the belt in Chicago or in Miami? That's what Bret was arguing. No, he wasn't arguing that. He was arguing, it was all about respect. Still corny, but that's what it was. And the fix was in. Obviously, Vince couldn't get Bret to agree with anything, so everybody conspired against him. Apparently, he thought he had Earl Hebner in his back pocket because they didn't talk to Earl before Bret got to him, because Bret had a sneaking suspicion this was going to happen. Earl did say at first that he wasn't going to do it, but unfortunately, he was pulled aside before the match occurred, right before the match occurred, and he was told to do it, which put Earl in a predicament. And they ended up screwing Bret Hart. You know, the whole Shawn put Bret into the reverse sharpshooter spot happened, and Earl rang the bell before Bret tapped out. it looks like Brett was going to reverse the sharpshooter, and that didn't happen. They left the ring. Brett spat in Vince's face after the ringing of the bell, even though Brett didn't tap out. He started to break all the equipment back, around ringside. He did the whole little iconic WCW riding in the air shit. And that was pretty much it. They screwed Bret Hart, and they will not stop talking about this 30 years later. And you have people who try to consider whether or not it's a work or if it's a shoot or whatever the case may be. I'm not here to tell you what to believe. That's your personal perspective, not mine. But nevertheless, though, it happened. And, it had consequences and a domino effect that happened afterwards. But within its scope, yes, obviously, one may argue it's the most controversial moment in professional wrestling history, and for a while, it probably was, for about 2 years, which we'll get into in a little bit also, which also somewhat stems from the Montreal Screwjob, but as a standalone, of course, it's one of the most controversial moments in professional wrestling history. If for nothing else, like I said, it's now 2025, and we're still talking about the Montreal fucking Screwjob. All right, we got ourselves a little bit of a late entry. This is a late entry at number 3, the Vince McMahon scandal. Arguably the most controversial moment to have happened in recent memory, for sure, of the 2020s. I don't think anything comes even remotely close to this. It was the biggest scandal of last year, as I talked about in my year-end review that I did last week as of the recording of this video. It's in the miscellaneous playlist if you care to see it, if you're watching this in the future. But yes, the Vince McMahon scandal, the Janelle Grant controversy, all the stuff that came along with it, as far as the Rita Chatterton stuff, the masseuse allegations, all the stuff that came into fruition that ended up taking Vince McMahon out. And boy, did it take him out. It took him the fuck out. Now, as I talked about, obviously, in the 2024 retrospective review, as far as the year-end stuff is considered, this all goes all the way back to 2022, right? When all the allegations and stuff started to surface up. But the thing is, as I said beforehand in that video, it's not as if we didn't know any of this stuff existed prior. Right? Like, we all knew this. We all knew this all occurred prior to all of this. We all know about the Vince McMahon stuff that happened in the 1980s with the limousine, and as I said before, the Rita Chatterton stuff and the allegations as far as the Rainbow scandal stuff that we talked about previously. We all knew this to be the case. The 2006 stuff, the masseuse stuff that happened in 2011 or 2012 or whatever. We all knew about this. The thing is, we're now in an internet age, and this is not to excuse Vince, it's just to say that you are now in an era, we are now in a time where people have how do I put this, because I don't want to make this seem as if I'm dismissing all the victims that were involved with Vince, alleged, by the way, still has to be proven, but it's to say that all the stuff that occurred is to suggest that there are people who they have in their hands, right, a device that they could just type words in and be known by the rest of the world almost instantaneously, right? Or as quickly as anybody that has ever been famous in the history of humanity because of this kind of things, right? But currently, at the moment, everybody's trying to do that. Type words in to be super viral and all this other kind of stuff. So to bring this up doesn't necessarily get out of contention as far as what is the norm in today's society. Hell, I've done it myself with some of my downfall videos, right? Bring up the past and all that other kind of stuff to make it relevant today. But that happens to be the environment in today's society. And Vince McMahon and all his different troubles came up to the surface, and Vince McMahon tried to go out of his way to pretty much hush them up by giving them expenditure or giving them money based off what was made by Titan Sports, right? So I don't want to say embezzlement, because I think that's the wrong word to use, but he essentially paid off all the people that he has been wrapped up in with money made by Titan Sports and not out of his own pocket, which means essentially you're using company expenditures in order to pay off your troubles, which obviously shareholders are going to have a problem with, because what the fuck, dude? And that's how all the troubles started off, right? And initially, Vince McMahon ended up stepping down and retiring in July of 2022, only to come back into the picture, and he wanted to sell the company, right? He wanted to make a quick penny off of it. That was his reason for coming back, and obviously everybody was devastated by this, because they kind of felt the company was going into a different direction, but Vince wanted to put it into this direction because, again, he wanted to make the maximum amount of profit from a company that he knew that he was not longed for. And unfortunately, he did end up selling the company to TKO, but when he sold it to TKO, at the same time, some other allegations started to rear its ugly head. So when he sold it to TKO, or they became business partners, or they became a subsidiary along with the UFC underneath TKO as sister companies in 2023, as I said before in the retrospective video of Ariel Manuel, he wanted Vince McMahon to be a part of the operations without really understanding the consequences that come from having that, because there's a reason why Vince is trying to sell this company as fast as he's trying to sell it, because he knew that he was longed for this company. Well, Ariel found out about that the hard way, because a bunch of scandals, even post that, started to come out that were well more relevant, with Janelle Grant, who alleged that Vince McMahon ended up defecating on her head, and he sex trafficked her and made her do other unruly things that were very, very graphic, along with the defecation stuff. And most of Vince McMahon's party, including John Laurinaitis, were allegedly a part of this, and it just brought out all the other allegations that Vince was a part of. And Vince was looked upon as an actual monster, a deviant, a disgusting human being, which, again, as wrestling fans, I feel like we all knew this. Now, the Janelle Grant thing, when it first broke, no one knew about this. But as far as all the other things that they are now compiling to, put right next to the Janelle Grant stuff, I mean, we all knew this already. It's just that we're now seeing it all tied together. And it paints a very, 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 not even negative, like I said, immoral picture of Vince McMahon, the owner of the company, where essentially they not only fired Vince, or I guess you can't really fire him, but necessarily they I guess you could say fire. They distanced themselves from Vince McMahon, right? Eradicated all things that were present when he was around, and they want nothing to do with Vince McMahon. You know what I mean? And now he is nowhere near involved with the company, at least contractually speaking. And the stories that came out that aligned with Vince, and then you take all the 40-year history of Vince McMahon, and then you wrap it all into one, and then you have this huge scandal that permeates itself, and then you bring in the Ring Boy scandal stuff in itself. You can call it some of the biggest scandals that has ever happened in the entertainment business. I've seen people compare Vince to Harvey Weinstein. I've seen people compare Vince to Diddy. And in my opinion, yeah, they're comparable. One may even argue to a lesser degree, because at least with Harvey Weinstein and Diddy, you can say those provocations were relatively recent compared to Vince, because Diddy, from my understanding, he started these crazy ass parties and doing all this disgusting stuff probably at best 30 years ago, at worst 20 years ago, right? Because it would have been more relevant. Whereas with Vince, he's been doing this arguably for 40 years now. And that doesn't even include all the other stuff as far as you know, the diva stuff like Ashley Massaro, for an example, right? And all the stuff that they got themselves involved with. So yeah, Vince McMahon and the scandal stuff has been taught to death throughout 2024. It is still currently, as of the making of this video, in court proceedings, and we still have to see the verdict when it's all said and done. Like I said, when that happens, I'll make a video. Been waiting for a year now, but like I said, when that happens, I'll make a video on it. Pretty sure it'll happen sometime in 2025, most likely, because it is a lawsuit with Janelle right now. And we'll just see how everything has to go as 2025 progresses. But yeah, the Vince McMahon scandal, crazy. Again, not crazy in the sense that we didn't know it occurred, but crazy as to the results being that Vince McMahon is no longer in charge of WWE. I think that in itself is bigger as far as the controversy is considered, compared to all the stuff Vince has got himself into or participated into, only from the sense of, I never thought I'd see the day that Vince McMahon was not the owner of WWE. You know what I mean? That's for me the biggest, like, holy fuck. It's not the shitting on Janelle Grant's head and all this other kind of stuff. We're all adults. You've seen worse shit and you've heard worse shit. It's the surprise of this man who fought the government being taken down by this in such a fucking cinematic way. But like I said, we'll see as how the year progresses if we'll get a conclusion to all of this. But for sure, the most controversial moment of the decade and one of the most controversial moments in wrestling history. I'm pretty sure you guys know what the top 2 spots are going to be. So we're not going to play dumb, and let's just get directly into both of them. 2 of the most controversial moments in wrestling history. Number 2, the death of Owen Hart. So as you guys know, with Owen Hart, he came into the company somewhere in the early 90s. I believe maybe in 1990, but I could be wrong about that. I know he was teaming up with Coco Beware for a minute, right? And Owen tried his best to branch out. He was somewhat of a jobber to the stars for a minute, right? He was doing that and still wrestling in Stampede for a minute. And then he got his break in 1993, where he started to feud with Bret Hart, obviously. That built into their WrestleMania 10 match, which Owen ended up surprisingly winning the match. And then they had their match at SummerSlam in their steel cage, one of the best matches in that company's history for the WWF Championship, which Owen ended up losing. And Owen and Bret feuded for a little bit, on and off, after that. You know, Owen did his thing with Yoko in 95 and 96. He was doing his thing with Davey Boy and, you know, Camp Cornette and all that other stuff. And then 97, he teamed up with the Hart Foundation and stuff, and Austin. And obviously in 98, that's when the problems started to occur. You know, especially after the Nation of Domination, and he started to team up with Jeff Jarrett, because Owen was really never the same. When you think about it, Owen's peak was in 94. He never was the same. But with Owen, he never necessarily cared about any of that, right? After a certain portion, or after a certain time frame, I wouldn't even be surprised, especially during the Attitude Era, if Owen didn't even care anymore. I wouldn't even be shocked if his passion for the business was pretty much gone after the Montreal Screwjob stuff, but especially after the Nation of Domination, right? Now, granted, he is still surrounded by his friends. He was loved by everybody in the nation, especially by Mark Henry. Obviously, he's good friends with Jeff Jarrett, so teaming up with him was not necessarily something that wasn't fun for him, I presume, because he's still teaming up with his buddies. But considering his position, and considering that during the Attitude Era, the in-ring action, which was what Owen Hart was, you know, very, very good at, and that was his expertise, was never a focal point. You can't help but think that with Owen, he just didn't have the passion for the business anymore, right? I think even Owen said it before all of this, that all he wanted to do was make enough money for his family to retire on, so he can be there for his kids, and so that he can be there for his wife. He was a family man first and foremost. You know, and with Owen on the road, he didn't necessarily have the passion for wrestling anymore. I just believe that after 97, he just lost the passion for it. And, you know, obviously with the boys, Owen was, from what I understood, listening to everybody, you know, have their accounts about Owen. You know, he was a prankster backstage, you know, did a lot of ribs and stuff like that. So that's pretty much how he kind of kept himself sane throughout the years of being within the company, while knowing that his expertise wasn't used to its greatest benefit, right? And unfortunately, he needed ways to stand out. You know, he needed reasons to stay with the company in order to make the money that he was making, because as you guys know, with the Montreal Screwjob stuff with Brett, Owen wanted to leave too, along with Davey, along with Jim. By that point, Pillman already passed away, but he probably would have left too. I'm not sure. But unfortunately, they didn't let Owen out of his contract, which unfortunately led to his demise when you really think about it. He wanted to leave. Had they let him out of his contract, he'd be allowed to this very day. But like I said, throughout 97 and 98, Owen was just trying to find himself, especially throughout 98, especially after the Nation of Domination stuff. And he ended up reverting back to his blue blazer gimmick that he debuted in the company in initially. I don't know if this was prior to High Voltage or after with Coco, but he came into the company initially as the blue blazer. This character went like 7 years prior to the events that took place in 1999. But Owen was running this blue blazer gimmick where we all knew that it was Owen under the mask, but we were supposed to, you know, like, I guess Owen was trying to make it like, no one knows my secret identity. And he was feuding with most of the mid-card wrestlers at the time, you know, Steve Blackman, who else during that time frame would have been feuding with him? Maybe Goldust, Godfather, whatever, you know, Val Venus, the typical guys. And Owen ended up, so the whole thing was with the blue blazer was that it was supposed to be obviously a goofy gimmick where he'll come down the rafters, he'll have a hard time taking the thing off the hook and everything. He was supposed to be a goofy superhero, right? And he'll always get himself entangled in Jeff Jarrett's matches, and the whole goofy thing will be like, oh, well, Owen is there to help out Jeff Jarrett, but he has the mask on, and Owen's like, it's not me. But then people will be like, you're the only one affiliated with Jeff Jarrett outside of Deborah. But Owen's, it's not still, it was all fucking stupid. I don't mind Vince Russo's booking compared to everybody else and their outlook, but this was just all fucking stupid. I know Vince Russo's philosophy was get everybody on television and give them a purpose to be on television. You could have done that for Owen in a more substantial and reasonable way. Because it's like, this is the Attitude Era. Who the fuck cares about this? Who the fuck cares about the blue blazer gimmick? Like, truthfully speaking, who was this going to get over with? I think is the better question. Who was this supposed to appeal to? Kids aren't supposed to be watching the Attitude Era. Theoretically, it's TV 14. Kids aren't even supposed to be up watching this shit. So who is it appealing to? I'm all for giving people a purpose, but a purpose like this? For what? For what? But nevertheless, though, Owen did comply. He didn't want to comply. It wasn't just the stupidity of the gimmick in itself, because the alternative would have been an affair angle with Jeff Jarrett and Deborah, which Owen was not comfortable with because his kids and his wife watch television and he did not want them seeing him like that. So this was the alternative, was the blue blazer gimmick, really putting him between a rock and a hard place. And speaking of which, it gets even worse, because during one of the things that Blue Blazer was supposed to be doing, apparently they gave him some new equipment so he can actually detach himself a lot faster so it can look more spectacular, which Owen was not comfortable with doing, especially from those heights, of which Vince McMahon allegedly threatened Owen with, hey, you either do this or you lose your job, which Owen looked at as a no winning situation. And he tried everything to get out of rehearsal so he didn't have to at least go through that process. Eventually, Owen went through with it. And in the match with Godfather for the Intercontinental Championship, fortunately and unfortunately, they ended up playing a vignette highlighting all the stupidity behind the Blue Blazer gimmick going into the Intercontinental Championship match with Godfather. And during the vignette, something happened. Jim Ross comes on commentary and he talks about the events that took place during the vignette while Owen Hart was making his way down the roof with the unnecessary, stupid fucking gimmick that shouldn't have ever happened. His equipment malfunctioned and he fell from the roof. About 70 feet is what they said. And Owen, he hit hard. He hit very hard. He ended up hitting his chest coming down on one of the turnbuckles and collapsing in the middle of the ring right there. Now, actually, I can't remember if it was a turnbuckle or if it was one of the ropes, but he did hit a part of the ring while coming down. Allegedly, I think it was Jimmy Corderas or one of the referees, I think it was Jimmy, where apparently while Owen was falling from the sky, allegedly, he told Jimmy to watch out. Otherwise, there would have been 2 casualties. But Owen hit one of the ring properties around inside the ring. That's how far away, by the way, because I'm not even sure where he was supposed to be coming down for. Was he supposed to be coming down from the rafters inside of the ring? Because that would have been the first time, right? I'm so used to seeing Owen coming down from the rafters onto like the ring ramp area, like at the end of the ring ramp. I'm so used to seeing him coming down on that side. Was he supposed to come down in the ring? But then again, if they were running the vignettes, were they trying to do the whole like, I don't know, like skip the entrance, get directly into the match gimmick or whatever? I'm not sure. Because he felt in either that or like, was he just so off course from where he was supposed to land at that Jesus Christ, he's like, what, like damn near 3 yards away from where he was supposed to be at? Just craziness that they allowed this to happen if that's true. I wonder if that's a question anyone has ever asked. Was Owen supposed to land in the ring? Because that's not typically what he did. But nevertheless, he hit the ropes, and obviously it caved in his chest, caused internal bleeding, and it caused blunt force trauma. And I think, if I remember reading, it completely severed his aorta, which is, the main artery in your body. It's the little thing that goes over your heart. Just completely severed it, which, like I said, caused internal bleeding. And he died from that. Owen Hart passed away over one of the most senseless, pointless, stupidest, ridiculous stunts ever. And it was so much, it's like, man, there was so many ways to prevent this. Not even just the skit in itself, but his life in general. So many ways to prevent this. You could have let him go with his brother, with the rest of the entourage, going to WCW. You could have let him go with his family, but you decided not to. You decided to keep him there to put over Triple H, and then do what with him? Fucking all but nothing, but bury him. The guy who helped main event, the guy who helped carry your company through the most toughest times in '94, you ended up essentially doing everything that you said you were going to do to Bret. As to how you ran Bret off, you did to Owen. You used Owen to put over DX. And this is the things that he gets. This is the things that all he wanted to do was wrestle. That's it. That's it. I want to know if they test any of the equipment out that they gave to Owen. Probably not. But you tell Owen to go out there to go use it. And you know the crazy part about it? And we'll get more into the dumb fuckery of some wrestling fans as we start to go on, because we have one more spot, obviously, and you know what we're going to talk about in the first spot. But it just makes me so sick to my stomach how you hear wrestling fans say things like, Martha should get over it. You know what's crazy when I hear fans say things like, let Owen into the Wrestling Hall of Fame for WWE? Are you out of your fucking minds? This is how you know these are smelly, Pringle-eating fucking losers sitting inside their house who are just surrounded by their wrestling memorabilia, most likely probably fucked. These people are delusional. They are insane. They don't think rationally. Why in the fuck would you put people in the Hall of Fame of the company that literally created every fucking preventable circumstance they went against that led to the death of your significant other or your family member? Are you out of your fucking minds? Of course Martha Hart made the right decision. I will look at her crazy if she ever let Owen Hart into the WWE Hall of Fame. Are you out of your fucking minds? I don't care. Whoa, there's a regime change. Whoa, Devontae, it's been 30 years. Maybe she should get over it. You can get over this dick in your mouth. How about that? Saying some crazy. She should get over it. She should get over the fact that she's been widowed for nearly 30 years. That her kids have no father. She should just get over that. Their kids have a legitimate relationship with their father. She should just get over that. This is what I'm saying. This is that Cheeto dust finger shit talking right now coming from these losers. No, she should never get over it. That's the love of her life. Gone. Through no fault of her own. And you want her to get over it? No, someone should get over you. That's why you're anonymous. That's why no one knows who the fuck you are. Because people probably got over you because you don't matter in life. If that's the way you think, you don't matter in life. No one loves you. And if they do, they lie to you. Owen Hart deserved more. Owen Hart, he should be remembered as one of the greatest wrestlers of all time. Which he is in some cases, but always marred with this. Because they wanted to do a stupid fucking haha gimmick. Now, would I go as far as to say that Vince Russo is a murderer? Or that Vince McMahon is a murderer? No. No, that's not right. But to pretend they didn't facilitate the environment that ended up killing Owen? You'd be lying to yourself. The fact that this company got away with that, in my opinion, is remarkable. Because at least with number one, that had nothing to do with them. I think that's fucked up. But this right here, literally, they took away every preventable thing that could have saved Owen. They did that. No one else did that. They did that. And now a mother is no longer with her husband. And her kids no longer have their father. And for what? And you have the audacity to say they should be allowed to make money off that man's name. You're fucking high as shit. But I expect nothing else from a mouth-breathing wrestling fan to think something like that. You're sick in the fucking head if you're thinking that. You need to really, really, really get the fuck out of your house, walk around the real world, get into a relationship, and see what a relationship actually means as to why someone would not do anything as ridiculous as what you say they should be doing. You're fucking sick in the head. With that being said, though, rest in peace to Owen. It's been almost 30 years now. And I'm religious. And I like to think that he's somewhere up there looking down on his kids and protecting them and guarding them and doing what he can do from a distance. So senseless. but also one of the most controversial moments in wrestling history. But before we get to the number one spot, I will like to take the time. I'm not going to talk during it. I'm just going to show you guys 5 spots that unfortunately missed the cut of making it on the list. But nevertheless, they deserve to at least be shown. So here it is, 55 through 51 of the most controversial moments in wrestling history. And number 1, the most controversial moment in the history of professional wrestling. The double murder-suicide of Chris Benoit. Now, I'm pretty sure you guys aren't surprised. You know it had to have been one or the other. It was either going to be Owen, or it was going to be Benoit. At least with Owen, these were things relegated to incompetence. These were things that were relegated to the death of one individual under horrible, terrible circumstances, absolute irresponsibility. But this didn't involve a child. This didn't involve 2 innocent lives. This is a lot more complicated as far as who to attribute blame to outside of the actual perpetrator. Chris Benoit, and I'll just come out and say it, is one of my favorite wrestlers of all time, if not my A1, A2 to Chris Jericho. Chris Jericho and Chris Benoit are the reasons why I'm even talking to you right now. The year 2000, when they feuded over their Intercontinental Championship, culminating in my favorite match in the history of my life and the history of the business, the Royal Rumble ladder match for the Intercontinental Championship in 2001. That is the reason why I'm talking to you right now. I will forever go to my grave as one of Benoit's biggest fans. I miss seeing him on my TV. That will never go away. I cried when he died. And there's nothing that you can really do about certain things like that as far as how you feel. With that being said, you can also easily, you should also take away from this that Chris Benoit was indeed a monster. I don't know how else to say this. I don't know why this has to be said. You have people who make up circumstantial evidence and stupid fucking proof in order to get away or get around the denial. Because this is all it is. It's not even a cope. It's basic denial. You're denying reality. You never mind how immoral and how disgusting it is to take the murderer and put him on a pedestal while the surviving family members have to hear you praise the murder of their daughter, the murder of their sister, the murder of their aunt, the murder of their significant other, the murder of their significant other's son, their grandchild, their nephew, their cousin, their brother. They have to hear you because you like the way Benoit wrestled. They have to hear you, who was not there, take not only the obvious, not only police reports and your stupid Illuminati convoluted bullshit aluminum tinfoil hat wearing silly ass bullshit conspiracy theories. They have to read and hear your mouth breathing ass say these disgusting things in order to have the morality to praise fake wrestling? You disturbed individual. Chris Benoit, throughout a weekend, heinously murdered Nancy. He put a knee in her back and put a cord around her neck, and he pulled and he pulled and he pulled until she died because she couldn't breathe. That's what Benoit did. He murdered her in cold blood. He watched her struggle. He murdered Daniel. And mind you, according to the reports, there was no signs of restraint. There were no signs of Daniel fighting back. Meaning, there's a good shot that he was sedated before all this occurred. He sedated Daniel. He put his hands on his neck and he choked him. He choked him to death. He stared at his son while his eyes were closed and choked him to death. What do you say about that? What do you say about that? This is the person that you want to celebrate? 2 innocent lives taken from him as he watched them struggle? Because that's what's reported. That's what's shown. That's what's seen. That's what forensics suggests. He sat there and he watched his wife struggle to not be killed by him. And he stared down at his son while he choked him to death. That's the person that you want me to ignore. You want me to ignore everything that he did that night, to celebrate how good of a wrestler he is. Hear yourselves right now. Then the coward, because that's what he is, he's a fucking coward, because he couldn't face the music, he hung himself with his weights. He hung himself after murdering a woman who was probably 3 times less his size, because he's a professional wrestler, and she's a woman who hasn't been anywhere near the business in almost a decade, maybe over a decade at that point. He murdered a defenseless woman, and he murdered a defenseless child. And to make sure justice was never sought, he murdered himself. You sit here, you make up all these conspiracies because of what you hear other YouTubers say is plausible deniability versus actual forensics, versus the obvious circumstantial evidence, without giving any substantial proof as to why. What would be the reason for all of the flat earthers out there? What is the motivation? You never give that. Yet you run your fucking mouths trying to get a murderer promoted. Trying to save the name of a murderer. That's you. A couple of YouTubers running around who should be ashamed of themselves, suggesting nothing in regards to actual evidence. Things such as, well, I kind of heard Benoit's voice and it sounded kind of weird, and therefore the weirdness of his voice completely takes away from all forensic evidence that suggests otherwise, that Benoit did it. What more can you say about these people? They're about as bad as the WWE officials who were negligent during the murder of Owen Hart. Well, I wouldn't say murder. Let me not say that again, because it's not as if responsibility is up to them, but it's not as if they deliberately did it like Benoit did it. It wasn't the murder of Owen Hart. That's not right. Do not say that, Devontae. Chris Benoit's a murderer. WWE is not a murderer. Benoit's a murderer. They're just highly irresponsible. It goes beyond responsibility for Benoit. He was responsible for their lives being taken. That's what he's responsible for. And look at all the things that come out of this, right? Look at all of the horrible, detrimental consequences from a guy who bullied people in order to preserve the business. From a guy who made it a point to torture himself to preserve the business, put his body on the line to preserve the business. And you can make up all the excuses in the world. Brain trauma this. He had the brain of an 80-year-old Alzheimer patient. All these excuses, roid rage, all of this. Paul Heyman said it best. 3 people were there. 2 people didn't have a choice. 1 person had a choice. It's as simple as that. And like I said, all the consequences that comes out of this. Not to say that he was even pursuing it, because I never really took him seriously. And I kept up with David. I follow David very, very closely. You're the son of Chris Benoit. Of course I'm going to follow you closely. No update yet. The biggest update we got was him pretending as if he could go out there and legitimately wrestle on one of those house show events in Canada before Jericho put a stop to it. Because, hey, you have no fucking actual legitimate training, so why the fuck are you in the ring? Outside of that, no. Just making the rounds, making it known that he's Chris Benoit's son, living off his dad's name, which is his right. That's his son in the end of the day, but that's the closest we've ever gotten for David. Not to say, even if he did train, did he ever have a chance? There's no way. There's no way. First off, he looks like Benoit's doppelganger. That is Chris Benoit's son. You can look at him and you know that is Chris Benoit's son. He has no chance. WWE will never take him because of the name. WWE will never take him because of who he is. The sins of his father goes to his son, unfortunately. The repercussions that it had on the business going forward. You know, you got all these people who take up for Chris Benoit. Typically, these are the same people who miss the good old days, the nostalgic days of the Attitude Era. Well, due to Chris Benoit, he's one of the reasons why you don't get your little fun chair shots to the head anymore, right? He's the reason why you don't get your little fun damaging moves or whatever the case may be as far as promoting angles are considered. Along with, obviously, Mattel and TV deals and television contracts and toys and deals as that such. But understand that Benoit is a heavy contributor to the so-called PG era. You do know that, right? I'm pretty sure most of you know that. Again, you pretend you don't, but you know. Look at the families that are damaged by what he did. The associations, right? And you still somehow praise him. Now again, like I said, you can praise Benoit as a wrestler. I do it all the time. You can separate character from the actual wrestler in itself. I didn't know Benoit. I don't know Chris Benoit as a man. I've never met him as a man. I've never met the man Benoit. Never met him before, period. What I miss is the character that I know. What I miss is the crippler crossface. What I miss is the multiple German suplex, the hat trick. What I miss is the flying headbutt. Maybe not that so much, but nostalgia wise. What I miss is the suicide dives. What I miss is the sharpshooter. Those are the things that I miss. The snap suplex, the headbutts, the knife edge chops. Those are the things that I miss. There's nothing about Chris Benoit the man that I miss. Because the things that I see, the so-called, as he got closer to the end of his life, the obsession over the death of Eddie, the alcoholism apparently alleged towards him when he never touched the alcohol in his life prior to all of this, the guy who was so health conscious he would read contents along with Eddie Guerrero to see how much calories something had in order to get around even eating it. That same guy no longer existed towards the end of his life. Chris Benoit is someone who I looked up to the point where things would get hard in life and you just envision in your mind like, damn, what the hell would Benoit say if you was actually here watching you or doing something like this, right? That kind of shit. When you actually aspire to be a professional wrestler and you want to be like a Benoit. All that down the fucking drain. You can call it mental all you want to. Still occurred. Can't take that back. The repercussions it's had on the business going forward. And you know the worst thing in the world, as far as the actual circumstances surrounding this, obviously when you talk about the reality, the death of a child and the taking of an innocent life, 2 innocent lives, is the most important thing as far as the takeaway from all this. But circumstantially speaking, Benoit was the biggest affected victim by all this when you think about it, circumstantially speaking. Just imagine your debut match, 1986. 1986. We are 1 year removed from Chris Benoit having his 40-year anniversary of being in the business. 40 years of Benoit wrestling. Think about that for a second. 40 years. And actually, now that I think about it, no. Because Benoit, he didn't debut in 86. No, he didn't. Thinking this back in my mind right now. I remember him talking about this. No. He said he debuted on Thanksgiving. It would have been 85. It would have been 1985. So actually, no. He debuted, I think he said around Thanksgiving time in 85. This will be his 40th year right here. How poetic. How poetic. All of that down the drain. Gone. Never to be reflected on again. The New Japan Cup, establishing the indie scene for years to come. The cruiserweight division that he helped start. The transition period of WCW wrestlers to WWE wrestlers. The innovation. The 5-star matches. The historical matches. They don't even exist anymore. So physically, the biggest victim may obviously be the actual victims. But never forget, Benoit's dead too. The biggest victim of all of this, technically speaking, is Benoit. Thanks to Benoit. This event nearly killed the entire wrestling business. People having the audacity to never even been connected with Benoit, going on television shows talking as if they actually knew him, talking as if they actually kept up with wrestling nowadays to see the state of mind that he was in. There are wrestling fans who will probably have more connection with Benoit than some of these people who claim to have at least have a glance of the legendary Chris Benoit backstage, talking as if they actually knew him. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. But that indeed is the most controversial moment in professional wrestling history. Was the murder-suicide of Chris Benoit. Rest in peace, Nancy and Daniel. And as always and forever, rest in piss, Chris Benoit. And with that, that's going to do it for the top 50 most controversial moments in professional wrestling history. This was a ride, indeed. Definitely one of those projects where it takes a toll on you a little bit reading some of the information in order to reflect on it with you guys. And, the next project, I said it was going to be WrestleMania time for the Attitude Era video. I might save that one for a little bit further down the road. Maybe not at WrestleMania. Maybe towards the fall season, I might do another project. And that's definitely going to be the next project. 2000 and 2009. Just like I did the retrospective for 2024, same thing for the Attitude Era. Can't wait to do that video, but at the same time, I can definitely wait. I had fun making this series. I'll leave the playlist down in the pinned section below. And as I said, you guys can go back whenever you want, reflect off of it, and I'll make sure to put this on the flash drive. So if anything happens to the channel in the future, at least this time I got all my projects saved on the flash drive, so I can always just re-upload it when the time comes, or give it to someone to re-upload. But like I said, I had fun making this series, and hopefully I hope you guys appreciate it, because a lot of time and effort went into this. And like I said, if you want to, all you gotta do is go down in the pinned comment section below to relive everything again and watch 50 through 1 all over again. But with that being said, folks, that does it for the 50 most controversial moments in professional wrestling history. Take care.